This part of Sonoma County, this is prime agricultural land. A lot of the early farmers viewed nature, as many farmers still do today, as something to try and wrestle into submission and control. This property is now in its 6th growing season of 100% biodynamic organic farming. At the most basic level, for the organic side of it, which is overlapped with biodynamics, is the elimination of all synthetics. Our fertility is all created on this property through composting, through recycling of vineyard waste, landscaping waste. The only input that we're bringing in is cow manure from an organic dairy nearby. There's no pesticides, there's no herbicides. The latter, the herbicide, is the one thing that many farmers cling to because it's such a labor-saving device. Being able to just simply drive a tractor and spray a toxin on the weeds to kill them rather than having to manually till them. As you can see, we don't have an issue here with weeds, and we are not using any herbicides here. This is all done through, we use both a hoe plow to come and break and aerate the soil, and a tiller under the vines, and then we'll come through by hand with hose and do any final cleanup with that. But also by working this way, as opposed to spraying an herbicide will kill the weeds, but it leaves the soil in a compacted state. And there's quite a few disadvantages to this. It creates anaerobic environments within the soil, so the soil microbes can't thrive. Mycorrhizal fungus that is what allows the vine to take up its nutrients can't survive or thrive. And also you lose water at a faster rate. The soil, when it's compacted, it creates sort of a capillary action that draws the water up to the surface where it evaporates, whereas when you've broken that capillary action with this tillage, we'll probably go the entire growing season without irrigating this block once, whereas a lot of vineyards get irrigated every 3 days throughout the whole growing season. Organic. The principal areas are the cultivation of the soil. There's a lot more handwork there. We like to be much more conscientious of the management within the canopy. In other words, the zone at which the fruit is actually growing and developing, how much shade there is on the fruit, how much the fruit is congested. These are all things, if we were spraying some nuclear, fungicide on here, we'd be less concerned with. But because we're not using any synthetics here to control these, our friend is sunlight, dry air circulation. So we will make multiple passes and do things like take out little lateral shoots, look for grape clusters that are crowding each other, compacting on top of one another, and we'll make as many as 4 or 5 passes through a block, just adjusting the crop so that everything is hanging freely with good air circulation and just the right, depending on the variety, the right degree of canopy to either prevent sunburn, but give it enough direct sunlight to build the phenolic qualities we're looking for within the fruit. It had been assumed in the wine industry, or at least the conventional wisdom for, say, the last 10, 15 years, was that organic wasn't a value added to wine. It wasn't something you wanted to discuss if you were farming organic. People said the reason for this was that in the 70s, there were a few organic wines that came to market made by very idealistic folks who didn't know the first damn thing about making wine, and made some pretty miserable wines, and that sort of tarnished the image of organic wine. That has really turned around, and it seems to be gaining momentum, as a lot of the greatest wine producers in the world are quietly coming forward and putting up their hands saying, well, I've been organic for 200 years on this property. One thing about farming this way, which is a real joy in the winemaking, is that I find the fruit that comes from these vineyards has a balance to it that requires no manipulation on my part. There's a whole host of things as a winemaker I can do to adjust the grape must or adjust the wine, ways I can intervene, and I prefer to do as little as possible. The greatest wines are wines that are grown here, and then once I bring them in the cellar, it's a very simple and natural process that occurs. So I don't add any commercial yeast to our wines here. I just bring the grapes in, destem them, and whatever came from the vineyard, whatever's living in the cellar, whatever's living on me is what starts to do the fermentation and conducts it all the way through. I've had fantastic results. It's one of those things that is scary to some winemakers because they want to have control over the whole process, but that control is usually an illusion anyways. We'll be preparing this for replanting next spring. I guess if the question is ultimately more expensive to farm organic or biodynamic than conventional? In the short term, it is. In the long term, that's another question. I've seen vineyards that are 150 years old and still not only productive, but making brilliant wines. And I've also seen vineyards that after 25 years of being pushed very hard through conventional techniques have collapsed. Every time you replant, you face an enormous expense in replanting. If you add that up every 25 years, it starts coming out pretty close. But there's obviously a lot more that goes into making that decision than just, are we going to save $500 per acre in farming costs?